In front of a group of people, a tall, young man in a janitor's outfit had his head bowed, looking to the floor. "Sir." Suddenly, one of them grabbed his head and slammed it into the sink. "Arg!" He yelled out a cry but forced himself to stay silent, shuddering. "Make sure you scrub that restroom till it is spotless. After all, the only thing distinguishing you from it is the smell." Lucas taunted, triggering laughter from the group. Mason watched as they, one by one, left the restroom with style. After they had exited, he sighed. He brought his hands to touch his forehead and winced at the tender bump. Mason Vince remained silent, lifting his gaze from where he had collided with the sink. Mason was already used to all of this. Enduring such treatment was nothing new to him. He had no right to fight back because Lucas was the accountant of Wim's hotel, so he held a higher position than him and Mason might be sacked from his job. His phone began to vibrate, and as soon as he saw the caller ID, he picked it up immediately. "Babe, stop calling me that. It's been a week since I told you I was sick, and you've done nothing. Why did I have to fall for someone with empty pockets?" Her voice shot at him through the phone. Annoyed, a wave of fear passed through him. Though he wasn't surprised by her tone, as he was used to her nagging, he couldn't help but always get scared at her voice. "Look, babe, I promise you that once I receive my money and gather it together, I will take you to a good hospital. I'll repay all the money I borrowed and all the work I'm doing for you." He didn't even finish his sentence before she abruptly hung up. All the work he was doing was for no one other than his sick girlfriend, Anna. The thought of remembering how she sounded on the phone broke his heart. He had wondered how she would be doing since she hadn't picked up his calls for the past 3 days. And now, the first thing he was met with was her harsh voice. He was desperately trying his best to gather the money for her treatments, but she didn't want to understand him. He took on all kinds of work, from being a delivery man to a janitor, and he also worked in different restaurants and hotels just to make sure he could take care of her. He wouldn't lose her no matter what, and he would do whatever it took to make sure she didn't break up with him. He loved her blindly, even though she didn't treat him well. After finishing the task of cleaning the accountant's toilet, his heart raced as he exited the restroom and caught sight of Lucas. His heart skipped a beat. "Come here, you loser," Lucas called out in his husky, rude voice. He approached Lucas, bowing his head in fear. Lucas retrieved a file from his drawer. "Take this file to room 12 and hand it over to the manager, James Starr, and be quick about it," Lucas instructed. He accepted the file, once again bowing his head, and left the office. Being bullied by everyone in the hotel had become a regular occurrence for him. If he dared to defend himself, it only invited more mistreatment. But he overlooked it all because he was doing it for his one true love, Anna. He believed that soon she would understand him and his struggles and not yell at him anymore. He climbed up the stairs as he walked through the hallway, looking at the door numbers. As soon as he saw the number 12, he stopped. He raised his hands to knock at the door when he started hearing sounds from inside. He began to hear moans coming from the room and dropped his hands. The situation was only getting worse, and he had no choice but to wait for him. If he didn't, he knew he would receive more insults from Lucas. He waited for about 7 minutes, hearing a loud breath in and out. He then cleared his throat and knocked. Come in, James," the manager said in a shaky voice as he opened the door. As soon as he laid his eyes on Mason, he bared his teeth and hissed, "This irritating son of a bitch. Baby, I'm coming." He grinned at the woman straddling him, returning her kisses. "I was asked to give this to you, sir," he said, extending his hand with the item. "And so what? Can't your useless brain tell you to drop it and leave?" He shouted, causing him to freeze in place. These insults, again. With a reluctant sigh, Mason dropped it and was about to leave when a voice stopped him. "Baby, relax. Come on, let's have another round." The voice struck a chord deep within him, as he recognized it was familiar. His heart skipped a beat as he abruptly turned around. The moment he caught sight of her face, he gasped. "Anna?" he called out. Shocked, she swiftly disentangled herself from James, hastily covering her naked body. Mason." Her eyes grew wide with surprise. "Mason, look. It's not what you think, I swear, she stammered, her words sounding desperate. He simply couldn't believe the scene before his eyes. No, this couldn't possibly be true. How could his girlfriend do this to him? What the fuck is going on here? Don't tell me this is the boyfriend you've been telling me about, James exclaimed. She let out a weary sigh and nodded. I thought you were sick. So, this is why you didn't let me come visit you? You've been in this hotel with my manager for the past 3 days. Mason seethed, no longer concerned about the consequences, whether it meant losing his job or not. She offered no response, merely rolling her eyes. For 3 years they had been together, from college until now, even about to get married. He just felt like he should unsee what he just saw because it was tearing him apart from the inside. I never loved you, she started. What? Mason exclaimed. Yes, that's the truth of it all. I dated you in college because you were fucking intelligent, and that's all. You would do all I asked, help with my assignments, and even almost get caught for helping me in my exams. That's the only thing that connected us. And you were a fool not to notice I didn't love you. She paused, her arms encircling James' waist. It was true. People had whispered it to him, though often with added insults. Yet he had never taken them seriously, thinking they were just jealous of the close bond they shared in college. There were lovebirds. And I wasn't sick at all, Mason. I simply wanted to keep you out of my life because I didn't know how to break up with you. You're just an orphan who craves love. And you used that advantage against me, Anna? He choked out, his voice trembling. Fuck yeah. And the worst part is, I don't regret it. But I hope you find a woman who loves you for who you are. 'Cause you're an amazing person. As for me, Mason, I can't. She unleashed the truth she had been hiding for all those years, not minding if it hurt him or not. He clasped his hands over his chest, trying to reduce the pain he was feeling inside, but it kept getting worse. How could you do such horrible things to me? What have I done to you to deserve this? She rolled her eyes, deliberately avoiding eye contact with him, but he continued staring at her, and she gave him a firm, irritated look. He observed her actions and the expression on her face. Was he dreaming? Could he be mistaken? Was this truly his Anna? Listen here, Mason, or whatever the hell your ugly name is. I want you to leave this room, or else. James warned. Or else what? He blurted out, brimming with anger. Are you talking back at your boss? James bellowed. Mason realized this, and the furrow on his brow faded, let out a sigh, and looked away. So now you've got the nerve, huh? But honestly, tell me, Mason, how could you be so selfish as to believe that other men wouldn't be drawn to your beautiful girlfriend? James jeered, his fingers grazing her cheeks. Mason's anger returned and tripled as he watched him touch her with such lustful gaze. He wanted to give him a dirty punch on his face, but was barely holding back, his fists clenched tightly. Anna, is this truly who you've become? Is this why your attitude changed? He began, his voice trembling. Yes. She cut him off abruptly. And I've been dropping hints that I don't want this sick relationship anymore. But you were too blind to notice, she stated confidently, her words piercing his heart like a sharp needle. Did she say those words to him? The person who had promised him forever. He never anticipated that something like this would ever happen. Everything was just messed up, and he felt lost in the midst of it all. The mere thought of losing her pained him deeply. He had never wished for a day like this to come. Her behavior had indeed changed towards him, and that much was true. However, he could never have imagined that she would betray him in such a way. He had trusted her, believing that she, at the very least, understood human emotions and the pain they could cause. But now, it seemed that all his beliefs were just nothing more than him being delusional. She came down from the bed and walked towards him. He didn't understand what she was doing, but as soon as she brushed her fingers against the ring on her finger, he knew it was finally over. Take this ring and let's officially put an end to it, she stated coldly. Please, babe, I still love you. Can't we settle our differences? I could still be the man that you want, he pleaded, his heart breaking at the thought of her breaking up with him. She lifted his hands and placed the ring in his palm, closing it shut. Let's bring this fake relationship to an end. Now please leave. We were in the middle of something before you interrupted. she scoffed, rolling her eyes as she returned to the bed and kissed James. And hey, and make sure to close the door on your way out. And remove that hotel tag from your uniform because you're fired, James added with a sneer. He heard the words James spoke, but his gaze remained fixed on Anna, who wore a smile as she ran her hands over his chest. He left the room, closing the door with a loud thud. Tears streamed down his face, but he quickly wiped them away. He made his way to the accountant's office, as the assistant manager was absent. He removed the hotel tag from his uniform and placed it on the accountant's desk. "Wow, don't tell me you've been fired?" the accountant exclaimed in surprise. He nodded silently, about to take a step forward when the accountant called him back. "And where the hell do you think you're going without repaying the money you borrowed from the company for your girlfriend's illness? Do you realize that your salary for 2 months won't even cover the loan? What do you expect me to do now?" the accountant questioned angrily. His tired eyes lifted a little as he remembered. Why was his life so messed up? "Please, I promise that within this month, I will repay the loan," he pleaded. "I'll give you until next week. If you can't repay the $5,000 by then, you'll face severe consequences. Do you understand?" the accountant threatened. He nodded sadly, his head hanging low, before shamelessly walking out of the office. At that moment, he felt as though his life should come to an end. He was a poor orphan boy who had received a scholarship to study in college. There, he had met Anna, who pretended to struggle with a subject and had grown so clingy to him. He had fallen deeply in love with her, going so far as to help her cheat on exams, not knowing he was just a tool for her to pass through college. He sat down on the floor outside the bustling streets of Bay Hill City, watching cars and motorcycles pass by while recalling everything she said to him. Forced tears streamed down his face, even though he tried not to show the pain through his tears. Why was he even crying for someone who didn't value his love? He hadn't even thought of taking care of himself because her happiness was his happiness. His mistake was falling in love with the wrong person. He opened his hands as he saw the ring, realizing she continued the relationship after college for a year out of pity. No wonder her attitude changed after school. There was no need for him to live again because his only hope for survival had betrayed him and left him shattered. He had no parents and no one to help him out. He struggled hard throughout his stay at college. Even though the fees were already paid for him, his food and other expenses were paid for with his sweat. "Where is death? Why don't you come and take me now?" he said aloud as he stood up and angrily threw the ring so far that it disappeared into thin air. He began walking slowly, hoping that a car would just come and take his life. After all, it was just meaningless. No love, no money, no job. Nothing at all. Suddenly, vroom, vroom. 3 Bugatti cars screeched to a halt in front of him, causing him to flinch and wonder what was happening. Fear gripped him as the bodyguards exited the vehicles, their expensive black suits contrasting sharply with the surroundings. They positioned themselves around him. What is happening? The driver came down from the middle car and opened the back seat of the car, revealing an elderly man in his late 50s. The man stepped down from the car and approached him with a warm smile on his face. "Son, I've finally found you," he said, enveloping him in a tight hug. Confusion overwhelmed him. Why would a wealthy man like this hug him? And out of nowhere. I don't understand. I have no family and—" he stammered, trying to voice his confusion. He couldn't help but wonder how can a rich man like him, beholding his arms like that. He looked at how sad and happy he was staring at him, as he narrowed his eyebrows. "And what, Mason?" the man interrupted him gently, looking at him in concern. "And what about me, Mason? Are you denying the fact that you don't recognize me? Are you still holding a grudge because I left you at the orphanage when you were little?" Mason forcefully pulled his hands away from the man's grip. Was he joking, or was he mistaking him for someone else? He stared at the man, trying to place where he had seen that familiar face before, but his memory failed him. "I still don't understand what you're saying. I'm just an orphan." Mason trailed off, gazing deep into Andrew's eyes. Suddenly, A vivid memory from 20 years ago flashed through Mason's mind. The time he was kept inside the orphanage home. He recalled Andrew's promise to return and take him away. But the promise was never fulfilled as he never returned, leaving him with no choice but to stay in the orphanage. The memory rushed back, flashing in his head. Mason remembered how he had been dropped off near the gatekeeper's room. The confusion and tears when he was told that his father had passed away. Mason covered his mouth with trembling hands, tears welling up in his eyes. He scanned Andrew from head to toe, confirming that he was indeed the one. The only birthmark on his left eyebrow, large and unmistakable, was the key to recognizing him as his father. "You've grown, Dad. Maybe that's why I didn't recognize you at first," Mason said, his voice filled with different emotions. "You left me at the orphanage, promising to come back the next day, but I never saw you. Should I call it betrayal, Dad? What are you doing here if you don't want me?" Mason's words were laced with hurt and a hint of anger. Andrew let out a heavy sigh, his expression reflecting sadness as he reached out to hug Mason. But Mason stood tall, his hands firmly in his pockets. "Come with me, Mason. Let me make it up to you, please," Andrew pleaded, fully aware of the anger Mason held towards him. He was uncertain if he would agree to go with him. Mason hesitated for a moment, unsure whether to feel happy or sad. His day was already bad, and now this. But then he looked at the 3 cars and all the bodyguards surrounding them. How had his dad become so rich? When Mason was 5 years old, he remembered his dad only having a Mercedes-Benz. If that was the case, his dad had a lot of explaining to do. "Let's go," Mason said, and immediately all the guards bowed down to him. The car door was opened by one of them, and Mason entered as it zoomed off. When they reached Andrew's mansion, Mason's eyes widened as he looked at how huge it was. He slowly stepped out of the car, admiring the interior designs. The combination of ash and white looked beautiful together. They strolled inside the house, and the standby bodyguards bowed their heads. Mason didn't know why they did that, but he smiled at them anyway. As they walked, everyone suddenly stopped. Mason was confused because they were supposed to knock before entering, but to his surprise, it was an elevator. "Wow, an elevator as a front door?" he whispered to himself. Andrew and Mason entered inside, and Mason was amazed. His dad wasn't just rich but extraordinarily wealthy. The parlor alone resembled a palace, with its wide space and pretty red flowers placed in each corner, making it even more alluring. "Please have a seat, son," Andrew said as he nodded his head. Mason sat down, and after a few minutes, Andrew returned from inside with some files. He sat down beside him and handed over the files. "These contain the missing accounting records from my company, which holds $40 billion, Andrew said. Mason's eyes widened, and the file in his hands slipped from his hands. "What? That's an enormous amount of money," Mason exclaimed, both shocked and filled with disbelief. Andrew nodded, but then a frown appeared on his forehead. "Wait, do you think that removing $40 billion from my account will affect my balance?" Andrew asked, leaving Mason taken aback. "Huh? I don't understand." Mason trailed off. Andrew let out a low, raspy laugh as he opened a wine bottle on the table, poured some into Mason's cup and his own, and handed it to him. He raised his glass. "Let's give a toast to the soon-to-be owner of the trillionaire's property and my heir," Andrew said, clicking his glass and taking a sip, while Mason remained in shock and slowly sipped the wine. "Dad, you're a trillionaire?" Mason exclaimed. "No, son. I will no longer hold that title," Andrew replied, taking a small sip and placing his glass on the table. "You now own the title of the trillionaire. Soon everything will be willed to you. Do you know about the Wilson Group and the power it holds in Bay Hill City?" he asked. Mason nodded, finally understanding why the name sounded so familiar. It was said to be the most powerful group in the city. Its owner was rumored to be so dangerous that people would bow down to him on the street for fear of being attacked. However, it was not because of his nature, but rather the respect he commanded from other wealthy individuals. They all bowed to him because he ruled the city. Mason couldn't believe the fact that he was now a trillionaire. In the blink of an eye, His life had taken a beautiful turn. He felt both shocked and happy, but could only display an expression of shock. The trillionaire properties were going to be willed to him and him alone, not shared with anyone. Wow, wasn't that a huge flex? Suddenly, a message alerted on his phone. He picked it up and saw that it was a notification. $50 billion is being credited into your account. How? He paused, then slowly turned to Andrew, his eyes bulging in realization. To tell you the truth, this is just chicken change for a trillionaire, Andrew said. As Mason thought about Anna, he clenched his fists. The main reason she broke off their relationship was because he was so poor, working petty jobs just to take care of himself and Anna. But she had fooled him for so many years. But could he let that slide? Of course not. A sly smirk slowly formed across his cheek. He couldn't simply let it slide. It wasn't just Anna. Everyone who had bullied him, everyone who had treated him like trash, they would all pay for it. They must pay. Because it was payback time. He looked around the room he had slept in. It was 4 times bigger than the room he used to sleep in, and even the meal he had eaten the previous night filled him up like never before. He picked up the clothes that were laid out on his bed. It was just a white long-sleeve shirt and black trousers. He wondered why Andrew had given him these clothes. After dressing up, he left his room and descended the stairs, making his way to the parlor. The bodyguards at the front of Andrew bowed their heads as soon as they saw him. As I mentioned yesterday, the funds were stolen from the Willstone Group, and I need you to get them back for me, son, Andrew said, pausing as he handed over the papers to Mason. But why do we need to catch the person responsible, Dad? I think we have more than enough money to cover the loss, Mason questioned. Andrew chuckled. That's not how we do business, son. Someone stole this money from my group's profits, and I want it back. You are the only person I trust in this life after someone I once trusted betrayed me. I need you to get it back. I don't want the thief to think that I'm weak or scared of him, which is why I can't chase him myself. Of course, you're not a weakling, nor are you scared, Mason declared. That's what I want you, my son, to show him. That's why I bought the company suspected to be involved under a business partner's name. I believe he is the one who stole the records, Andrew explained. Mason checked the files, and as soon as he saw one, he raised it to see the company's name. His company, Mason read aloud. Yes, Mason. That's the company I'm referring to, Andrew confirmed. Indeed. This is surprising and suspicious, Dad. How could a company's sales grow so much in less than 30 days? Mason pointed out, and Andrew nodded. You are now our spy in that company. You will be going there today. Just make sure your identity remains hidden to find out if it's truly him. I don't know his full name, but his first name is Gerald, Andrew instructed. All right? Mason nodded, ready to leave. In case of any difficulties, do call me. I will attend to it and call Mr. Lincoln, the person running the company instead of me. Andrew instructed before Mason embarked on his mission. Mason nodded his head, fully committed to the mission he was about to undertake. He would ensure to do a thorough investigation, but that wouldn't stop him from seeking his revenge. If he didn't take his revenge, he believed it would be better to die, because the intensity of his revenge would be insane. After arriving at the company by taxi, Mason examined the building as he reviewed the files documenting the companies before and after the reconstruction. A smirk played on his face as he observed the huge transformation. The cost of rebuilding the new company amounted to around $20 billion, while the old building had been valued at $340 million. Wannabe Willstone, he scoffed. Trying so hard to be like the Willstone Company, aren't you? He looked at the file again. Another $20 billion had been allocated for boosting the company's sales and investments. $40 billion in total. Oh, bro. Did you have to make it so obvious? But then, this raised the question in Mason's mind. Why hadn't he invested in the largest group in Bay Hill City? Mason strolled into the company, bowing his head to the bodyguards who looked at him like someone they had beef with. Rolling his eyes at their behavior, he made his way inside and approached a woman who appeared to be a staff member. I'm a new intern, and I would love to meet with the... Mason began. Your girlfriend? She interrupted. her tone dripping with sarcasm. "Excuse me," Mason blurted out, taken aback. She rolled her eyes and hissed, then walked away without another word. Shaking his head, Mason spotted another woman sitting down, engrossed in her phone. Bowing his head, he approached her and began speaking. "Excuse me, can I please see the secretary?" he politely asked. She glanced down at his legs, scoffed and responded, "If you want to work as a cleaner here, you won't be seeing the secretary. You'll have to go meet the head of catering." Mason grew frustrated. "I'm a new intern, and I'm not here to work as whatever you name it. Just show me the way to the secretary's office. Thank you." She scrutinized him from head to toe before reluctantly pointing in a direction. "You can go this way. I just hope you don't come back looking embarrassed," she remarked. Mason walked away, brushing off her comment. He was a bit annoyed, but he didn't let it affect him. He decided to let it slide for now and focused on finding the secretary's office. He knocked on the door, but there was no response. Just as he was about to knock again, he noticed that the door was already open. He twisted the doorknob and entered the room. Inside, he saw a woman operating a laptop. Bowing his head, he introduced himself. "I'm a new intern, and this is my..." But before he could finish his sentence, something caught his attention, and he quickly raised his head. His heart sank immediately. "Okay, so..." She also paused, her eyes widening. "The fuck are you doing here, Mason?" It was Anna, and the sight of her face ignited anger within him. What in the solar system was she doing there? He clenched his fists and struggled to hold back his emotions. This was going to be pretty harder than he expected. "I came here to work as an intern, Ms. Anna," he answered, his voice filled with tension. Anna scoffed and stood up, crossing her arms over her chest. "Can I have a seat?" he politely requested, trying to maintain composure. Anna rolled her eyes in response. "Tell me the real reason you're here in this company, or I'll kick you out right now." Mason was taken aback by her words, confused about what she meant by the real reason, or what was going through her mind. He thrust his hands into his pockets and furrowed his brow, trying to understand her words. "I don't understand." "Oh, really? You think I don't know that you're here because of me? Do you want to win me back? You think I don't know? Huh?" Anna accused. Mason laughed loudly because he found it amusing. He couldn't believe that was what she was thinking. He shook his head. "To make it short, please check the documents of your new staff and find my name in them. I want to start my job right away." "And what if I don't? Because just looking at your face or knowing that you got this job because of me makes me feel sick," she shouted. "I'm not here because of you. You don't matter to me anymore. Understand that. Now, are you going to hire me and complete the necessary procedures, or should I go to my department by myself?" Anna was immediately taken aback. She couldn't help but feel irritated by his words, especially the fact that he called her dumb. How did he change so suddenly? Wasn't he the person who used to be deeply and madly in love with me and would do anything to make me happy? She wondered to herself. She knew how foolishly he had behaved towards her before. Or was he just pretending so that she wouldn't realize? She then looked at his computer and scoffed when she saw his name. She scoffed again and signed the document. Congratulations. He didn't even wait for her to finish her statement. He left her office, and she clenched her fists, nodding her head in frustration. "I will make you suffer so much in this company. Just watch and see. You will regret coming here because of me," she said with a smirk, then returned to her work. Mason didn't need anyone to tell him where the accounting department was. He saw a sign on the wall that read, "Accounting Department," and knew that was where he needed to go. He entered the department and found it empty, realizing that they must have gone out for lunch. His phone rang, and he saw that it was Andrew calling. "I need you to come to R&B restaurant right away. Your grandfather is eager to meet you. I hope you know your department and everything." "Yes," he responded. "Okay then," he said before ending the call and leaving the department. He smiled as he exited the company and hailed a taxi to take him there. When he arrived at the restaurant and stepped out of the car, his eyes widened at the sight of the wide building and the captivating interior designs that caught the attention of many people. He remained fixated on the fancy decorations as he walked towards the entrance. It wasn't an ordinary restaurant, but one which entertained the wealthy men of the city. However, he was stopped by the guards who held batons. "How can we assist you, sir?" one guard asked with a stern voice, while Mason smiled. "Oh, I'm here to meet up with my granddad. Please excuse me," he replied and wanted to leave, but he couldn't get away because the baton was still held hard at his front. Suddenly, the guards burst into laughter. "Do you think this is the countryside? Are you sure this guy isn't drunk or something?" the man with the baton asked his second. "I think so," his second responded. "Young man, come on. How can your grandfather have any business in this restaurant? I'm pretty sure we don't have any elderly staff here," the guard mocked. Mason frowned as this was getting too far. "Do you have any idea who my grandfather is?" Before the guard could respond, both Mason and the guard lowered their heads. "And who the hell do I see here?" "Lucas," a voice exclaimed. The voice sounded familiar to Mason, and as he turned around, he saw James and Lucas, who looked at him with surprise. At first, Mason felt scared, but he quickly suppressed that feeling. He then turned to the guards and said, "Please let me in. I'm pleading with you now because next time it might be you who will be pleading, and I won't listen to you." Mason's warning made James scoff. "What's happening here? Are you telling me he just threatened the security guards?" James exclaimed, while Lucas laughed and playfully hit the back of Mason's head. Mason remained composed, clenching his fists in anger as he closed his eyes for a moment and opened it. Mason thinks he can do whatever he wants now that he's been fired. It's like he's mentally ill ever since he caught me sleeping with his fiancée. James taunted, showing no regard for how hurtful his words were. Mason didn't reveal his true feelings because he knew it would only lead to more harm from them. They would beat him up. He vividly remembered all the things they had done to him, and it was triggering him inside. "Hey guards, ensure that he doesn't enter. After all, he's supposedly suffering from a mental illness." "Got it," James warned. "Yes, boss," the guards replied in unison, bowing their heads. Lucas scrutinized Mason from head to toe, laughing mockingly. What a pathetic excuse for a human being. With that, he walked into the restaurant. "Young man, you better leave. Otherwise, I'll beat you to a pulp," the guard threatened to Mason. Mason remained silent as he furiously picked up his phone from his pocket and dialed Andrew's number on his phone. "Son, aren't you here yet? Is something wrong?" "It's been 30 minutes, Andrew asked concernedly. "The guards won't allow me to enter. They said if I don't leave, I'll be beaten up," Mason replied with anger in his voice. He slammed his hands on the table and exclaimed, "What?" Then the call abruptly ended. "What a prank call," he muttered, then continued. "Did you just report us to your grandfather?" "No, he didn't report you idiots to his father." They all heard a voice as they saw a figure coming closer to them. "Manager?" they both exclaimed, bowing their heads in submission. "Do you two have any idea who the hell just made a call to an innocent grandfather?" the manager shouted, his face filled with anger. They froze, unable to respond.